My child, pause for just a heartbeat, because not every moment announces itself with noise. Some moments arrive quietly, carrying a weight that only the listening heart can recognize. This is one of those moments. Long before your eyes reached these words, something gentle had already begun unfolding beyond your view. Someone has been standing at the edge of an important choice, not because they are certain of every answer, but because they have reached a place where pretending no longer feels possible. Before another step is taken, before another page quietly turns, there is something they have been hoping you would understand, not through urgency, not through force, but through the quiet language that only sincere hearts can hear. Don't skip, because what follows is not about rushing toward an ending. It is about recognizing the meaning hidden inside a single pause. There are seasons when silence says far more than conversation ever could. This has become one of those seasons. While the world continued moving at its usual pace, your soulmate found themselves returning to the same thought again and again. They never expected one simple memory to remain with them for so long. They believed it would fade naturally, becoming just another passing reflection among many. Yet instead of disappearing, it settled deeper, becoming impossible to ignore. The surprising part was not how often they remembered you. The surprising part was how peaceful those memories felt, as though they carried a quiet invitation rather than a demand. Every ordinary moment seemed to whisper the same gentle question: what if there is still something unfinished? That question was never answered immediately. Instead, it followed them through ordinary mornings, familiar places, and conversations that appeared completely unrelated. They smiled when expected. They carried on with responsibilities. They told themselves life would naturally reveal the next direction. But every attempt to move forward somehow circled back to the same quiet realization. Some decisions cannot be made by logic alone. Some choices ask the heart to become honest before the mind can finally become clear. Stay till the end. Because this is where the story begins changing in ways that cannot be noticed all at once. One evening, during a perfectly ordinary moment, they stopped rushing. Nothing dramatic happened. No extraordinary sign appeared. There was only a small silence that felt different from every silence before it. In that stillness, they realized they had been waiting, not for permission from someone else, but for enough courage to face what had quietly been growing inside them. It was not certainty. It was not perfect confidence. It was simply the realization that avoiding a decision is also a decision, and the longer it continues, the heavier it quietly becomes. Yet even then, they refused to hurry. Instead, they chose something unexpected. They decided that before making any final choice about the path ahead, they would allow one last opportunity for understanding to unfold. Not because they expected everything to change overnight, but because they believed meaningful connections deserve patience. They wondered whether unseen pieces of the story were still waiting to reveal themselves. They wondered whether timing itself sometimes protects conversations until hearts are finally ready to receive them. If you could have seen that moment, you might have mistaken it for complete stillness. But beneath that calm surface, everything had begun shifting. The questions were becoming clearer. The distractions were becoming quieter. The heart that once wandered in every direction had slowly begun facing only one. And still, they did not move. They remained where they were, quietly waiting, believing that one final glimpse of clarity might arrive before the next step was taken. Something important is waiting for you, because what they are waiting to see is far more meaningful than a single answer. It is one quiet realization that could gently reshape everything they choose next. And that realization has not appeared, at least, not yet. What happened next was so subtle that almost anyone else would have overlooked it. There was no dramatic turning point, no loud interruption, no unmistakable signal demanding attention. Instead, your soulmate noticed something far more powerful, a quiet feeling that refused to disappear. The more they tried to focus on everything else around them, the more that gentle awareness returned, as if reminding them that some of life's most meaningful moments never compete for attention. They simply wait until someone is finally willing to notice them. They began replaying conversations in their mind, not searching for mistakes, but searching for meaning. Words that once seemed ordinary suddenly carried new depth. Small gestures they had dismissed as insignificant now appeared connected, like scattered pieces of a picture that had always belonged together. They asked themselves a question they had avoided for far too long. Have I been looking for certainty when I should have been paying attention to consistency? That single thought stayed with them far longer than they expected. The answer did not arrive immediately. Instead, it unfolded through quiet reflection. They realized that what truly remained in their heart was never the loudest memory. It was the calm one. The simple one. The moment that asked for nothing in return. Strange, isn't it? The memories that shape our future are rarely the ones that shout. They are the ones that patiently remain, even after everything else has faded. Don't skip, because this next realization changed the way they looked at the road ahead. For the first time, they stopped imagining what everyone else might think. They stopped measuring their next step against expectations that were never truly their own. Instead, they imagined something much quieter. They imagined what it would feel like if they made a final decision while one important piece of the story was still missing. That thought unsettled them, not with fear, but with honesty. They understood that a peaceful decision can only come from a peaceful heart, and their heart was still waiting for one final moment of clarity. So they made a promise to themselves. Before choosing which direction to walk, they would remain still just a little longer. They would leave one small window open. Not forever. Not endlessly. Just long enough for truth to arrive naturally, without being forced. It was a promise built on patience rather than pressure, and somehow that made it feel stronger than any rushed conclusion ever could. As the hours passed, something unexpected happened. Their attention was drawn toward one simple reminder they had nearly forgotten. It wasn't an object of great value. It wasn't a message filled with extraordinary words. It was simply something that reminded them of how easily genuine connections can be overlooked when life becomes too busy. They held that thought quietly, and for the first time in many days, they smiled, not because every question had been answered, but because hope no longer felt distant. Stay till the end. Because hope has a remarkable way of arriving before certainty does. And then, just as they believed they had gathered enough courage to make their final decision, something appeared that they never expected to see. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to notice, yet it was impossible for them to ignore. The moment they recognized it, everything paused once again. They did not make their decision. Not yet. Because what they had just discovered seemed to answer a question they hadn't even found the words to ask, and that quiet discovery is about to unfold. Just when it seemed the waiting had reached its quiet conclusion, an unexpected sense of peace settled over everything. It did not erase every question, nor did it suddenly reveal every answer. Instead, it created enough stillness for your soulmate to notice something they had been overlooking all along. Sometimes clarity does not arrive by adding more information. Sometimes it arrives when the noise finally becomes quiet enough for the heart to recognize what has always been true. They found themselves lingering over a simple thought that refused to fade. Why had every attempt to move forward felt incomplete? Why had every carefully planned decision carried the feeling that one final piece was still missing? The more they reflected, the more they understood that it was never about finding a perfect moment. It was about reaching a place where nothing important had been left unsaid within their own heart. That realization changed the way they looked at everything around them. The ordinary suddenly felt meaningful. Familiar places carried a different kind of warmth. Even the passing hours seemed less hurried, as though life itself was quietly encouraging patience instead of speed. They stopped asking, "How soon should I decide?" and began asking, "What deserves to be understood before I do?" Don't skip, because the next quiet discovery became impossible for them to ignore. As they sat with those thoughts, another memory surfaced, one they had almost forgotten. It wasn't the grand moments that returned first. It wasn't the exciting conversations or the unforgettable occasions. It was a small act of kindness, almost invisible at the time, that now shone brighter than anything else. They realized that genuine connection is often revealed through consistency rather than spectacle. The strongest impressions are rarely the loudest, they are the ones that remain long after everything else has faded. That single memory became the turning point they never expected. It reminded them that some people leave traces in your life not because they demand attention, but because they quietly make the world feel a little more peaceful. And once they recognized that feeling, they could no longer pretend it meant nothing. Something important is waiting for you, because they are beginning to understand that their final decision cannot be based on uncertainty alone. It must also honor the quiet truth that has continued to return, no matter how many times they tried to set it aside. So instead of rushing, they chose one final pause. They promised themselves that before closing this chapter, they would remain open to one last unexpected moment of understanding. Not because they were afraid to move on, but because they wanted to move forward without carrying unanswered questions into tomorrow. As the day slowly drifted toward evening, they noticed something remarkable. The restlessness that had followed them for so long had begun to soften. In its place was a calm anticipation, the feeling that something meaningful was drawing closer, not through coincidence, but through quiet readiness. It was as though every step of the journey had been preparing them for a moment that could only happen after they had learned to be patient. And then, just as they believed there was nothing left to discover, one gentle reminder appeared in the most ordinary way imaginable. It carried no dramatic announcement, no extraordinary display, only a quiet message that seemed to whisper, "Not everything has been revealed." The moment they recognized what that reminder truly meant, they realized they could no longer make their final decision today. Because one conversation, one they never expected to matter so much, was now closer than ever, and everything they choose next may depend on what unfolds within it. Without warning, the atmosphere around their thoughts became different. It was as though time itself had slowed, inviting them to notice details that had always been there but had never seemed important enough to hold on to. Your soulmate did not suddenly become certain about every answer. Instead, they became certain about one thing. They were no longer willing to ignore what their heart had been quietly repeating for so long. For the first time in many days, they stopped searching outside themselves. They set aside every imagined outcome, every expectation, every carefully rehearsed conclusion. In that silence, they asked themselves a question that felt surprisingly simple. If I make this final decision today, will I always wonder what might have happened if I had waited just a little longer? The question lingered, not demanding an answer, but patiently inviting one. The more they sat with it, the clearer everything became. They realized that peace never grows from rushing. It grows from allowing truth enough time to reveal itself. That understanding brought an unexpected calm. The pressure they had been carrying slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet confidence that meaningful things do not lose their value simply because they require patience. Stay till the end. Because the next moment unfolded in a way they never anticipated. As evening settled in, they noticed something almost impossible to explain. Their attention kept returning to the same feeling, not a memory this time, but a sense that someone else might be standing at a similar crossroads. It was as if two separate journeys, unfolding in different places, were quietly moving toward the same destination without either person fully realizing it. They didn't know why that thought felt so powerful. They only knew they could no longer dismiss it. Every attempt to focus on something else gently circled back to the same quiet realization. Some connections are not strengthened by constant movement. They are strengthened by the courage to pause before taking the next step. Don't skip, because this was the moment everything began to shift from reflection to intention. They made one final promise to themselves. Before closing the door on this chapter, they would look one last time. Not for dramatic signs, not for perfect certainty, but for honest clarity. They would allow themselves one more opportunity to recognize what had quietly been growing all along. As that promise settled into their heart, something unexpected happened. A feeling they had carried for so long suddenly became lighter. Not because every answer had appeared, but because they had stopped fighting the process. They realized that waiting is not always standing still. Sometimes waiting is where understanding quietly takes root. Then came the smallest moment of all. A familiar thought returned, but this time it carried a different meaning. Instead of asking, "What if it's too late?" it gently asked, "What if this pause is exactly what was needed?" That single change transformed everything. It replaced uncertainty with hope, not loud hope, but the kind that grows quietly, one heartbeat at a time. Something important is waiting for you. Because your soulmate has now reached the edge of the decision they believed they would make today. Their heart is ready to move forward. And yet, just before they take that final step, one unexpected truth begins to reveal itself, a truth so gentle, so deeply personal, that it has the power to change not only the decision itself, but the reason behind it. That quiet truth is finally beginning to unfold. At the very moment they believed there was nothing left to uncover, life answered with remarkable gentleness. It was not a grand revelation or a dramatic interruption. It arrived like the first light of dawn touching a quiet room, almost unnoticed at first, yet impossible to deny once it was there. Your soulmate felt an unexpected calm settle over them, and with that calm came a realization they had never allowed themselves to fully embrace. They finally understood that they had not been waiting because they were uncertain. They had been waiting because deep within, they hoped every important piece would find its rightful place before they chose which direction to follow. There is a difference between hesitation and wisdom, and for the first time, they recognized that difference clearly. They looked back over the journey that had brought them here. Every unanswered question. Every unexpected pause. Every ordinary day that seemed to carry invisible meaning. None of it felt wasted anymore. Each moment had quietly shaped them into someone capable of making a decision with sincerity rather than impulse. Don't skip, because this next realization became the quiet center of everything. A gentle thought rose within them, one they could no longer ignore. What if the person I've been waiting to understand has also been walking their own path of quiet growth? That question changed everything. Instead of seeing distance, they saw possibility. Instead of seeing silence, they saw reflection. Instead of seeing delay, they began to see preparation. Their hearts softened in a way it never had before. The need to force an outcome disappeared. They no longer wished to rush toward an answer simply because waiting felt uncomfortable. They wanted whatever came next to be built on honesty, patience, and mutual understanding. Something important is waiting for you. Because this was the first time they imagined a future that wasn't shaped by fear of missing a chance, but by appreciation for the journey that had quietly led them here. As they sat with that feeling, another quiet realization followed. If this final decision was truly important, then it deserved one last act of patience. Not endless waiting. Not uncertainty without purpose. Just enough space for the final missing piece to arrive naturally. So they made a choice unlike any they had considered before. They decided that before taking their next step, they would leave their heart open for one final moment of clarity. They would not close the door while hope still carried a gentle voice. They would not silence a feeling that had remained steady through every season of change. Stay till the end, because what happened next surprised even them. Almost immediately, the weight they had been carrying began to lift. Nothing outside had changed. The world looked exactly the same. Yet inside, everything felt different. The pressure to know every answer vanished, replaced by quiet confidence that the right understanding often arrives when the heart has stopped chasing it. And in that peaceful stillness, one final thought came to them. If what is meant to be understood is truly near, I don't have to force the moment. I only have to be ready when it arrives. Those words stayed with them long after the silence returned. They smiled, not because the story had reached its ending, but because they suddenly sensed they were standing closer than ever to the beginning of something genuine. They still have not made their final decision. Because one gentle moment remains. And when that moment finally arrives, it may reveal the very reason they waited this long in the first place. Then came the moment no calendar could have predicted and no careful plan could have created. It did not arrive with certainty written across the sky. It arrived quietly, almost like a whisper carried through an ordinary day. Yet the instant your soulmate recognized it, they understood why every pause had mattered. Every unanswered question had gently prepared them for this single realization. They closed their eyes for a moment and allowed every expectation to fall away. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to rush. Only one quiet truth remained. The heart becomes strongest when it no longer needs to force its own timing. That truth settled deeply within them. They realized they had spent so much time wondering whether the future would welcome them that they had almost forgotten to notice how much they themselves had changed along the journey. They were no longer the person who searched for quick reassurance. They had become someone who valued sincerity over speed, peace over pressure, and understanding over assumption. Don't skip, because this was the realization that gently transformed everything. A quiet smile appeared without effort. Not because every mystery had disappeared. Not because every question had been answered. But because they finally understood that the most meaningful decisions are never made from restless emotions. They are made from a heart that has learned how to listen before it speaks. As that understanding grew, they stopped looking at the future as something uncertain waiting to be conquered. Instead, they began seeing it as an invitation, one that would unfold one honest step at a time. They no longer wanted to rush toward tomorrow. They wanted to arrive there with peace. Something important is waiting for you, because this is the place where their final decision quietly began taking shape. They thought about every lesson this season had given them. The value of patience. The beauty of quiet hope. The unexpected strength found in simple moments. They realized that none of those gifts would have appeared if everything had happened exactly when they first expected it to. Then, with remarkable calm, they made the promise they had been moving toward all along. When I take my next step, it will not come from fear of losing something. It will come from gratitude for everything that has helped me grow. That promise changed the meaning of the journey. It was no longer about waiting for the perfect sign. It was about becoming the kind of person who could recognize meaningful moments when they arrived. Stay till the end, because one final realization remained. Your soulmate understood that some of the greatest turning points in life never begin with loud celebrations. They begin with one peaceful decision made in complete honesty. And as they reached that place of quiet confidence, they no longer felt hurried by time. They felt guided by clarity. The final decision they had been carrying so carefully was no longer a burden. It had become a reflection of who they had become. And perhaps that was the message they had hoped you would see all along. Not that every answer arrives immediately, but that genuine understanding often appears after patience has quietly done its work. So they took one gentle breath, looked toward the path ahead, and with a peaceful heart, they were finally ready to embrace whatever beautiful chapter would unfold next. The waiting had not been empty. It had been preparing them for this very moment. And that quiet beginning would remain with them long after this chapter came to a close. Just when it seemed the journey had reached its peaceful conclusion, another layer quietly revealed itself. The final decision was no longer the most remarkable part of the story. What truly mattered was everything your soulmate had discovered before making it. Looking back, they realized that every delay, every quiet reflection, and every ordinary day had gently prepared their heart for a truth they never expected to find. They understood something that cannot be hurried. Real connection is not measured by how quickly two paths meet. It is measured by how deeply two hearts learn to value what they have found. That thought stayed with them long after the silence returned. Instead of wondering what tomorrow might bring, they found themselves appreciating everything that had quietly shaped today. Every unanswered question had taught patience. Every unexpected pause had taught trust. Every moment that once felt uncertain had become part of a much greater picture. Don't skip, because this final realization may become the most meaningful one of all. Your soulmate smiled as they recognized something beautifully simple. The future they had imagined was never built in a single extraordinary moment. It had been built through countless quiet moments they almost overlooked. A gentle memory returned, not because it demanded attention, but because it carried peace. They remembered how easy it is to underestimate small acts of kindness, honest conversations, thoughtful pauses, and moments when someone simply chooses to understand instead of assuming. Those were the moments that had remained. Those were the moments that continued to shine long after louder memories had faded. Something important is waiting for you, because every meaningful chapter leaves behind one lesson that continues guiding every chapter that follows. As they looked ahead, there was no rush left inside them. Only gratitude. Gratitude for the journey. Gratitude for growth. Gratitude for discovering that some of life's greatest gifts arrive quietly, asking only for an open heart and a patient spirit. And then one final thought settled gently within them. Perhaps the greatest decision was never simply choosing a direction. Perhaps it was choosing to become the kind of person who could recognize genuine connection when it appeared. With that realization, the uncertainty that had once felt so heavy quietly disappeared. It wasn't replaced by perfect knowledge. It was replaced by confidence that whatever unfolds next can be met with honesty, compassion, and hope. Stay till the end, because this is the quiet promise the journey leaves behind. Whenever life invites you to pause before an important choice, remember that waiting is not always standing still. Sometimes it is where wisdom grows. Sometimes it is where courage becomes gentle. And sometimes it is where the heart finally becomes ready for the beautiful future it has been preparing for all along. Your soulmate carried that truth forward with a peaceful heart. And perhaps, in your own quiet moments, you will recognize it too. Not as an ending, but as the beginning of every meaningful chapter still waiting to unfold.